Hi, Soul Tribe. Welcome back to episode 13 of the Soul Method podcast.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.
It was only a few weeks ago when one of me and Joe's friends asked me, "How the hell do you do it?" I was like, "Wait, what?" He said, "Okay, so I've been inside of your car and I've been inside of Joe's car. You could eat dinner off the floor of your car. You can't find the floor in Joe's car. Doesn't that bother you?" And at that, I had laughed. "It doesn't bother me, though," I said to him. "He's just wired differently than me." "What do you mean?" Hence the inspiration for this episode. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 13 of the Soul Method podcast. I am your host and the founder of the Soul Method, Joelle Faucette. And today we are talking about pet peeves, what irks you, and most importantly, how to have amazing relationships with people in your life who are very, very different from you. To start off, I want you to think about what puts you at peace in your own space or in your own state of being. For some of you, this means knowing exactly what the plan is for the next 2 weeks, down to, like 10-minute increments. Meal planning and prepping, and maybe you're the person who has every shirt folded crisp and neat. For some of you, none of that matters. In fact, the thought of planning out the next 2 weeks feels incredibly exhausting and claustrophobic to you. And instead, the sense of freedom is what brings you to life. For others of you, the most peaceful thing for you to do at this moment is to lie down, tune out, and turn on a movie, regardless of the state of your laundry or the dishes in the sink. Really take a moment to think about this. What state does your home, your car, your schedule need to be in for you to feel peace? What do you have to do in your life to feel complete? I know it's human nature to make the assumption that the way you feel peace is the same way that someone else feels peace. In fact, we often tend to assume that the way we feel peaceful and the way we feel complete is the way that everybody else around us feels peaceful and complete. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that that simply is not true, right? We are each unique individuals. Today, we are going to dive into this, into how people are wired differently, and most importantly, how you can use this knowledge to enrich the relationships you have with everyone around you. Now, there are hundreds of personality tests out there, ranging from the very scientific Myers-Briggs to the not so scientific "which Hogwarts house are you?" test. And while I really appreciate the deep detail of the Myers-Briggs test, as well as the humor of these other personality tests, these tests are more often designed for a person to learn about themselves. And while I think that is all well and good, it can make it very challenging if a test is designed solely for you to learn about yourself, for you to apply it to the relationships in your life. The personality test I will base this episode on comes from the research of Marita Littauer and her book, Wired That Way, hence the title of this episode. This book separates personality types into 4 simple categories. And honestly, I've been using her research for my own personal and professional growth for several years, and it has proven time and time again to be both accurate and beneficial. And I have to give this disclaimer that I don't agree with everything in the book that she says. She has certain religious views that she expresses in there and other belief systems that are not a part of what I believe. However, the material on personalities and applying them to relationships has been amazing for my own growth. I'm not sponsored by them in any way. However, I do highly recommend that book. Now, I know breaking down personalities into four different categories may seem overly simple, but seriously, stick with me. Remember, the point of this exercise is to learn both about yourself and the people around you. And I definitely do recommend you go ahead and check out the personality test. And you can find it by either purchasing the book or going ahead and finding the personality test on their website. Now, in Wired That Way, the book breaks down the personalities into four different types. And each person is a combination of all four. However, every one of us will most likely have a personality type that is the strongest, as well as a runner up. And most of the time, our strengths and our weaknesses tend to display themselves as a combination of these two top personality types out of those four. These four personality types are choleric, sanguine, melancholy, and phlegmatic. Now, I know the names are weird, okay, but they're memorable, right? So stick with me here. So, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of these personalities, and you'll probably start to recognize yourself in one or two of these as I describe them, as well as all of the characters from Winnie the Pooh and probably several other characters from legendary stories that have outlived their makers. So, here we go. Let's start with the cholerics. These are the type A visionary leaders of the world. They are natural drivers, often incredibly stubborn, or in positive terms, persistent. And these people will really struggle to take breaks, rest, or do anything less than what they consider to be their best performance. These people often have powerful personalities. They are not really great listeners by nature, and they tend to be the alphas of their tribe. These are the people who will not stop to ask for directions, and in fact, they must be in front, regardless of whether or not they know where they are going. Cholerics believe the important things in life are the things that they care about, but if they don't care about it, it will be placed on the back burner. These people are extroverts if it helps them to achieve their goals. But otherwise, they will tend to prefer to work independently rather than as a part of a team. And then there are the sanguines. These people are the golden retrievers of the world. They literally skip out their door on a daily basis with the mindset of, they're gonna like me. Sanguines are social butterflies. They love the attention of their family and friends and often are the greatest storytellers. These are people, extroverts who don't really care about having a grand vision for the world as long as everyone around them is having a good time. Sanguines are also very emotional people by nature and tend to be very popular as they're always down for a thrill and very invested in the health of their tribe. Next, we have the melancholies. These people are perfectionists. Their homes are organized by color and in alphabetical order. They write lists, they use planners to set their schedules, and thrive in the minute details of life. If you color code anything in your life, chances are you're a melancholy. Secretly, the rest of us kind of hate you because you always seem to have your act together, like all the time. You seek order for the sake of order. Very different than the clerics who seek order based on personal investment. Melancholies need a plan in order to feel peace. Their safety is found in knowing what's going to happen, not out of a need to control, but more out of a need to sense that order is in place. And then finally, we have the phlegmatics. These people are peaceful. They are the best listeners, the best friends, and the kindest and most loyal people you will ever have in your life. If you are lucky enough to have a phlegmatic as a best friend, hold on to them tight and never let them go. Phlegmatics are often the wallflowers, and while they'll have many friends, they don't always love to be the center of attention. They aren't naturally people. They prefer to relax. They're not drivers or visionaries. They can work hard, but they also like to spend time alone. These are the people you want at your back. They are careful with their thought process and genuinely will care about you and your well being. Now, as we look at the differences between these four personalities, some of the two best examples I can give are how the personalities put furniture together, as well as how each personality knows that they are quote unquote right. So, if a choleric is putting furniture together, they will take all the parts out of the box, have a general idea of, okay, that might go there, this goes there, put all of the furniture together, and then consult the instructions to prove how great they are at putting furniture together. The melancholies obviously lay everything out neatly and arrange it by size, maybe by shape or color. They read the instructions thoroughly 2 times and then put together an immaculate piece of furniture. The sanguines may or may not ever actually take the furniture out of the box. They've invited a bunch of friends over, everyone's hanging out. And the point of this exercise is that everybody's having a good time in the process, whether or not the end goal is ever achieved. And the phlegmatics will look at the box of furniture for the next 6 months and may or may not ever put it together at all. So that's a really good example of kind of the extremes of these four different personalities. A choleric knows that they are quote unquote right just because that's literally how they're born. Cholerics enter the world believing that they are right. There's no getting around it. Melancholies know that they're right because they've done all of the research, they've put everything in order, and they can present you with 10 binders worth of information on why they are right. Then we have the sanguines, who, kind of like I said before, they know that they are right because everyone around them is having a good time and they've really forgotten the topic at hand about 5 minutes ago, but it doesn't really matter to them. Their point of them being right is that everybody's cool, everybody's good. And then lastly, the phlegmatics know that they are quote unquote right because they're relaxed, they're peaceful, and they're chilling out. And whether or not the thing ever gets done doesn't really matter. So now I'm hoping you're finding this all kind of hysterical and starting to recognize both yourself and some of your friends and family in these stereotypes. And this is a huge point I want to make right now because just because you consider yourself a certain personality doesn't mean you get a pass on bad behavior. Okay? So, for example, just because you're a choleric and you're like a really bold leader doesn't give you the right to be a jackass to people. Okay? Just because you're a sanguine doesn't give you the right to be an irresponsible party maniac. Okay? Now, similarly, if you're a phlegmatic, you also don't get the right to sleep all day. Okay, so the point of this exercise isn't to find excuses for our weaknesses and our bad behavior inclinations. The point of this exercise is to recognize where our natural strengths and weaknesses are and then be able to lean into our strengths and find support for our weaknesses. And also surround ourselves with people who can fill in the gaps for us. And that's what I'm going to go into now. Because why I think this personality test is so powerful isn't just because it gives me insight about myself. No one on this planet lives in a vacuum. I don't care how high up in the Himalayas you live, you still interact with some people at some point in your life. And this world is only getting smaller. If you take this information to heart, you can start to diagnose the people around you to use this information to build deeper and more satisfying relationships. So let's go through a few examples on this because this is really where I think the rubber meets the road with this type of information. So, for those of you who know me, you can probably already guess the personality types that I am. I am very much an even split between choleric and sanguine. I definitely am a big personality. I am an extrovert. I love talking to people. I love being around people. And I also am a very driven personality. I'm a natural leader. I like being out front. And I laugh all the time because my daughter is my mini me. She totally has the same personality as me. And watching her over the past few years, it just cracks me up. This whole thing where she has to be in front. She has no idea where she's going, but if we go to the park, she has to be in front. She has to lead. It's just totally in her nature to be that way, to tell stories with incredible passion, to say hello to everyone we know and everyone we don't know. And I have learned so much about myself from watching her. And so I'm sure none of that comes as a surprise to any of you who have spent any time with me, that I am a really big personality. And I used to actually hate that about myself. However, now I've learned to embrace it, and I am a much happier person since I've decided to dive further into my strengths instead of trying to become somebody else. Now, so you take me, the sanguine choleric, and you match me with Joe, who is a sanguine phlegmatic. Now, this is where it gets interesting because cholerics and phlegmatics are naturally opposites. The choleric is the driver, the leader. We can't sit still. I have a hard time taking breaks. If you've ever worked with me, you know that I hardly take a lunch break. It's not in my nature to stop and sit down. Phlegmatics are my opposite, where, Joe can sit on a Saturday and play video games for hours, and he's totally peaceful and happy doing that. Or he'll chill out and binge watch a TV series for 5 hours or something like that, and he genuinely recharges doing that way. I recharge in a completely different way. So, in that sense, we're opposites, and then we meet in the sanguine personality type. When we are out with our friends, he loves being the center of attention. He loves telling stories. He enjoys being around his tribe. And so here's the danger with this. And I've seen this so many times with couples where one person in the relationships looks at the other and says, "You're different than me." And I'll say cholerics and melancholies. We tend to be the most guilty of this. So I'll throw that out there. One member of the relationship will look at the other person and say, "I don't understand how you can do X." Right? It would be like if I looked at Joe and said, "I don't understand why you're okay with just sitting around all Saturday afternoon playing video games. Like, why is that okay with you?" And then we judge it, right? And then we put the judgment on it of, "You're being lazy, you're being a child, you're blah, 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 blah," right? Then the judgment comes in rather than having the ability to recognize that actually, if I, number one, choose to not take them personally, and number two, can genuinely see that they are wired differently than me, that, oh, him doing that for him is the same way as me doing this for me. We get the same result energetically, personally out of that. We just manifest it in completely different ways. In order for me to feel peaceful on a Saturday afternoon, I need to have either run 5 miles or done an hour and a half of yoga because I'm a fire spirit and y'all know it. For Joe to feel peaceful on a Saturday afternoon, he needs to have had some space and time to relax. And that's just him. So you can imagine that on one side of the coin, bringing different personality types together like this is a huge blessing because as opposites, me and Joe balance each other out a lot. I need him in my life so much for this reminder to relax. There's been several days where we've had movie days, and it was so challenging for me to relax for a day and watch movies and chill and order food. And at the end of the day, I've been incredibly grateful because I've needed the mental and emotional and physical break from activity to be prepared for the next work week or the next project or whatever I was about to do. And so when you have opposites, you can either use your personality tendencies to benefit each other and to fill in the gaps for each other, or to judge each other. Now, ultimately, the question is, if you're in a romantic relationship, which are you doing? Because it's always a choice. Similarly, with filling in the gaps, there's been plenty of times where I've helped Joe remember things or pushed ahead with certain things, and he's been grateful for me for that. So ultimately, whether you're looking at a romantic relationship, a professional relationship, or just with friends, remember that we have a tendency as human beings to like people who are like us, or we like people who we want to be like. That's just general human nature. We tend to connect with somebody who is like us or somebody who we desire to be like. Now, in a situation like this, where you have opposite personality types and somebody clearly has a tendency and a genuine need to recharge differently than you, can you be with that? So often Joe has asked me this question of, how is it that the story seems to go guy meets girl or girl meets guy, and they start to like each other, they start to date, they fall in love, and then the woman asks the man to change. Like, when we're dating, it's fine for you to play video games, but then all of a sudden we get into a serious relationship, whether it's a committed relationship or a marriage or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you need to change. And I really think a part of that is this personality judgment piece, where we're so willing to let stuff go until we look at the seriousness of a relationship. We're so willing to not take something personally until the relationship becomes serious. And then we take it personally and we make it about us rather than being able to genuinely be with the other person exactly the way that they are. Now, a really big way that this comes into play that I see all the time is with parenting. And this is always very interesting to me because, as you all know who have children, you cannot control your children. As much as I think I would love to control my children, or I think that I have any potential to ever actually do that, the reality is that I never will be able to. No one can. They are their own free-spirited beings who have a will of their own. And when you have a child who is an opposite personality as you, it can be very challenging to be with them as they are and help them grow into their natural strengths rather than trying to make them just like you. And this is where there's levels of parenting that we often don't see and often are not taught. And I really wanted to talk about this here because honestly, like, I grew up with a mom who was a very strong melancholy cleric. Melancholy is opposite of sanguine. So up until, I want to say, about 10 years ago, when I first took this personality test, the results came back as me being a melancholy cleric, not as a sanguine cleric. Now, why is that? It's because when I originally took this test, I took it from the mindset of the person I had been molded into by the way that I was raised, instead of taking this personality test as the girl I was before the world told me who to be. And when you take this test, that is a key component. Keep that in mind as you're going through the test, and especially if you get stuck on any of the questions. Think about, number one, how you would have answered as a child, and number two, how your best friend would answer for you. Okay? You want to go back to that place of genuine being for you before all of the influence from the world really started to kick in. So because I was raised by a mom who was very strong in her melancholy personality, I presented melancholy. I needed everything in my life to be orderly in order to have peace. And it took quite a while for me to kind of unpack that. And now getting back to the place of being my genuine personality, which is where I am the most authentic, I'm the most free, and I have the most joy for my life, right? Because I can promise you, if you're raised to present as a personality that is not authentic to who you are, you will not live a happy life. Being forced to live out a personality that is inauthentic to yourself will only result in miserable days and miserable nights. We naturally feel the most joy when we act in our natural strengths and out of our authentic nature. And I've covered that in other podcast episodes. So now, did my mom have any of this information? No. Did she raise me absolutely as best as she could with everything that she had at the time? Yeah, she did. And so did my dad. My dad was a different personality from her. My dad actually has a lot of sanguine blood in him. And I watched this judgment piece happen between the two of them, where my dad would be sanguine, would be outgoing, would be bubbly, and my mom didn't really get it. She didn't understand why he couldn't do X. And my dad didn't understand why she had to make such a big deal about it. And it was this undercurrent pattern of my childhood where I could always feel the anxiety. And looking back, I almost waited for it. I waited for my dad to do something and then waited for my mom to take it personally, judge it, and react to it. And that really was kind of the dynamic of the negative parts of their relationship. So I see this in, like I talked about just a few minutes ago, in a lot of other relationships. And it can be applied to this parenting aspect, where as I started to show more of my sanguine nature as a kid, my mom told me, you got to get your act together. You got to clean it up. You have to live a responsible life. And to be responsible for her meant to live a melancholy personality life where everything is in detail, everything is in order, and messy spaces were not a thing. Now, today, I have two kids, as most of you know. My son is 9 years old and my daughter is 4.5. And while my daughter is my mini-me, my son is completely the opposite. My son is very much like my ex-husband. He is a phlegmatic melancholy to the core. And while he loves being around other kids, he also has this inbred sense of order and is incredibly laid back. He is probably the easiest kid in the world. He's just super chill, very type B, and I thought parenting was kind of a breeze until I had my daughter, to be honest with you. She rocked my world. And I know she'll keep doing that. And, I'm incredibly grateful for all I've learned from raising her for these past few years as well. So now, if you can imagine me as a choleric, sanguine mom raising a melancholy, phlegmatic son. For a melancholy, they seek order simply for the sake of order, which is very opposite of a choleric, which, to be honest, and I say this to my friends, if I don't care about it, it gets pushed to the back burner. I won't pay attention to it. I kind of consider it a waste of my time. Even if somebody else thinks it's super important, if it's not important to me, I don't give a shit, right? It's not really the best way to live your life, but that is the tendency that I have. That is the choleric personality weakness coming out, right? But for my son, these things that were not significant to me at all, he cared about a lot, especially for the insignificant order of it for the sake of order. And if I didn't know this information, I would immediately judge that. I would say, I don't understand why you have to line that up that way. We're in a rush. Just leave it a mess, who cares if your socks don't match? No one's going to see them. But for him, it's incredibly important. And you can imagine the ramifications of that. The same types of ramifications that happened for me growing up, right? So that's really a message I wanted to put out to parents out there, is to really be aware and examine the personality traits of your children. And rather than going to the place of judgment and trying to make them like you, instead celebrate their differences, help them lean into their strengths. Probably one of the most challenging things for me to watch is children of all ages, myself and Joe included. We are still children to our parents, even though we are grown adults, is watching children of all ages in this dynamic with parents of all ages, where parents will demand a child to be like them and not give their approval or their love without that, and constantly go into this judgment piece rather than having the capacity to recognize that your child is simply not like you and that their strengths lie elsewhere. And only in recognizing who your child actually is where that genuine connection with them will come from. I can tell you right now, parents out there, if your child is constantly resisting you when you are telling them what to do, it's time for a different approach, because most likely there's a disconnect between your personality and what you find valuable and the emotional and relational needs of your child, whether that's an adult child like me and Joe, or that is a young child like my two children. Now, for those of you who know, I talked about this a little while ago. In my day job, I work for a test prep company. I help students get ready for SATs and ACTs and hire a lot of people who are far smarter than me to tutor these students for these things. And it's very interesting, this whole personality bit, because I am a very different personality than the owner of the company. The owner of the company is a melancholy, phlegmatic personality, whereas I am a choleric sanguine. And I am so incredibly grateful for the knowledge of these personality types, because without it, there would have been so much judgment between me and the owner of the company, rather than us being able to have really awesome conversations about how to divide and conquer. When you understand your personality and you're able to recognize the personalities of the people around you, and then lean into a genuine conversation. Hint, hint, go back and listen to other episodes of the podcast where we talk about letting go of judgment and leading into genuine conversations. Then you're able to play to your strengths. Then you can say, hey, I recognize this about you. I don't do that well. I have strengths over here, and this is where I find my joy. Also, hint, because I've actually done the personal research and holistic digging into my soul to know where I authentically shine. And if we take these two things and put them together, we can build an amazing company. And so at my job, I am on the phone a lot because I really love talking to people. I am definitely a visionary. I enjoy casting a vision for the team that works for our company. I enjoy creating programs, professional development, and propelling us into the future. That is where I shine. Now, where I get really hung up and start to turn into a absolute miserable bitch is where I get stuck in tiny details of things that seem to go on forever. The whole administrative assistant thing, can't do it. Not my jam. So, since I know that about me, rather than saying yes to things and setting myself up for failure, I instead say no and have created a situation at my job where I don't have to do those things nearly as much as I used to. Because it was like, oh, you know what? We can create a different situation where we play to our strengths instead of playing to our weaknesses. So, again, that's another way that you can use this information to create a life you love. That's what this is all about. Understanding yourself, understanding the people around you so that you can create relationships that are genuine, authentic, and bring joy to your life and help you bring joy to other people. As we bring this episode to a close, I want you to think about how we started this episode. I asked you about what irks you, your pet peeves, and creating amazing relationships with the people around you. Think about the things that get under your skin and bother you. Does it have to do with your personality type? Is it just the way you are wired? And maybe a part of genuinely being with other people is recognizing that they aren't trying to bother you, they simply are just being them. Again, this is another way to have perspective and not take the people around you personally. As always, I would love to hear from you. What did you take away from this episode? Do you see yourself in any of these personalities? What about the people around you and the relationships that you have with them? You can contact me through the Soul Method Facebook page or email me at Joelle, Joelle, at the.SoL.method.com. Thanks for being with me today. Until next time, Soul Tribe.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.